for me this morning, and we'll just get through the agenda. We'll tackle that issue later on. So for staff's purposes, number 1 will be continued to the following meeting, and we can address that later. Madam Secretary, why don't we go ahead and call roll first before anything else?
Okay, Councilmember Vicente Sarmiento.
Here.
Councilmember Jose Solorio. And Councilmember Sal Tinajero has informed us that he will not be able to attend this meeting.
And I thought I saw one of our colleagues as well, our Councilmember Villegas, who's here attending as a member of the public and somebody who wants to get more informed. So welcome, Council Member. Welcome to all of you. And Madam Secretary, do we have any requests to speak or any written communications?
No, we haven't received any requests at this time.
So for the public, if there is anybody in the public, we kind of run this fairly informally. If anybody just wants to raise their hand, they want to comment, let us know, and we can go ahead and have you address the committee. So as I said, if we can go ahead and move to continue that item, Council Member number 1 on your motion.
Yeah, move the item.
Second. So that item will...
I just wanted to remind everyone, because this meeting is being recorded and the audio is also being live streamed, if you are addressing the committee, please speak directly into the microphone and make sure that it is turned on, and you can assure that by the green light, because otherwise your comments will not be recorded and will not be part of this meeting. So if you wouldn't mind repeating your comment so that we're sure that we have it for record. Thank you.
Oh, I think they need it.
I think there was a motion.
We have a motion by Councilmember Solorio. I seconded it. There doesn't appear to be any opposition because there's no more members, so that passes by acclamation, and we're on to number 2. So is that something staff is going to?
Okay. Good afternoon, council members, and would like to move right into the review of the 2016 legislative scorecard. That is our legislative platform for 2016.
We have items 2 and 3.
Yeah, so I was talking about the bylaws. Is there any discussion on that? Is there anything that you want the committee to?
Well, the only thing that we can say is this is essentially a new committee, and so we do have I apologize for that. We do have the bylaws that were established by the Ledge Committee. And then we do not have bylaws for the Code of Ethics. So, that would be a discussion with the clerk of the council, who's here, about bylaws for ethics, because she oversaw that committee. And really it's just a question of, do we want to develop those? Do you want to direct staff to develop those?
I'll go ahead and open it up for... Do you have any comments or questions, Councilman?
The bylaws are fine. It just needs to reflect the new name of the committee, but other than that, it should work.
Okay, I think the only thing is, well, and maybe I can ask Maria, was there ever any discussion or development of bylaws for the ethics?
Actually, the Code of Conduct and Ethics Committee never moved in that direction, so bylaws were never requested, bylaws were never prepared, but we can certainly come up with something and merge them in with the legislative committee.
That's actually
bylaws.
a good recommendation, if you don't mind maybe blending the two, since this is a combination committee of a formerly lone-standing ethics committee and a lone-standing ledge committee. So why don't we just go ahead and blend those two? Can you bring those back to us?
We can bring them back at the next regularly scheduled meeting.
Great. So,
yeah.
And I know because that prior committee didn't do much work in that area. Maybe it might just be a paragraph saying that this committee will also address ethics and transparency issues as staff or council members want to bring forward, rather than trying to come up with some elaborate structure of what the committee might do.
Yeah. What we might want to do, Madam Secretary or Madam Clerk, what I do recall is the Ethics Committee was a function of Measure D.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that it required us to meet
once a year.
If it was once a year,
Mm-hmm.
twice a year. Mm-hmm. So to the extent that obviously we're going to be heavy on some of the legislative agenda items, we maybe want to dedicate a meeting or two as the need arises, but at the very least just to meet that requirement from the measure. So
we will make sure that we incorporate the annual review of the Code of Conduct and Ethics policy on an annual basis, and perhaps schedule a certain month, that this meeting takes place, to make sure that that's evaluated on an annual basis.
Right. And I would reference that in the bylaws as well. That
We will do that.
It would include an annual meeting of the measure.
Okay.
So we'll put this matter over as well, and have staff bring it back to us once that language is drafted. Moving right along to the meeting schedule.
So we have a proposed meeting schedule, and I'll let Yasmin respond to that, the secretary.
Hi, yes. So if you look at the calendar that we're suggesting, we're actually looking to have the meetings be held the month after the quarter closes. So for example, the quarter closed in March, so we're meeting in April, and so on in through January. And typically we meet the fourth Wednesday at noon, but that's also up for discussion. So if you'd like to change the time or the days, this is the time to do that.
Councilmember?
I think on the whole, it's a workable meeting. We just may want to give some thought to either, if the need arises, having a special meeting in late June or early September, because that's really when there's more legislative activity.
Okay.
And there may be more of a purpose of meeting additionally then, or instead of, for example, October 25th. October 25th is, it would be a nice wrap-up meeting, but at least for the first year session typically ends in mid-September.
Okay.
So there's a lot of activity before then.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
The only other comment I would make is that since Councilmember Tinajero has a more fixed or rigid schedule than maybe the council member and I, maybe we can check with him on these dates, check with him also on time. Right?
Oh, okay.
So maybe noon is not the best time for him. Maybe we may do an afternoon. I know that's what we used to do, I believe, with Councilmember Amesqua, who also had more of a fixed schedule, and we used to go after school hours. So let's check in with Councilmember Tinajero as well on just the timing. So
then, for the purposes then of the agenda, we're not just going to confirm this until we speak to the council member, because otherwise these become kind of regularly scheduled meetings, and we have to move forward with canceling and scheduling special meetings. So we will send you an updated schedule once we speak to the council member to see if that meets your approval.
and to incorporate Councilmember Solorio's suggestions of maybe trying to be more concurrent with
Yes.
session for the legislature as well.
Okay, sounds great.
So one more matter that we put over for review. We don't need any. Do we need any action items on those? Any votes on those, Mr. City Attorney? Got it. Thank you. And now we have the minutes, which is item number 4. So that's an interesting question. So since this is a newly formed committee, what's the recommendation from the city attorney on this? Because I know that even for myself, I was the chair of the Ledge Committee previously, but we didn't take up any ethics issues. So are we just looking at the minutes, or are we approving them, and approving them on what basis, I guess?
Councilman Sarmiento, that while the Brown Act does not formally require the preparation of minutes, ordinarily, of course, they are prepared. I believe your question pertains to the level of review that you would subject these minutes to, if I'm
Right.
understanding correctly.
Right. Do we need to, again, it says approval, do we need to approve the minutes? Is it more just for context for this, for the committees?
No, these minutes would need to be approved from the last session, yes.
Okay. So how would the council member approve it since he wasn't present during those?
What we can do is continue the matter so that Councilman Solorio can read those minutes and be in a position to approve them in his capacity as this committee, a member of this committee.
Okay. I know that, I always recuse myself from approving minutes where I didn't participate, even though I had a chance to review because I wasn't physically
Sure.
there. But that's getting pretty technical, and, the council member might have read them and feels comfortable approving them, so.
Yeah, I'll follow your lead on this, Councilmember Sarmiento. I know in a prior committee, just because we had a situation where multiple council members weren't on the committee before that, just as an administrative act, we went ahead and voted, approved the minutes, and you were there, so to the extent that you're comfortable with them,
I'm good.
comfortable as well.
Okay.
So,
So I'll move those.
second.
Okay, those minutes are approved, and we're going to move along to the number 5, which is now you have 2 folks who weren't on the committee on the Code of Ethics, Code of Conduct and Ethics Committee. So I'm not sure if we want to wait on Councilmember Tinajero, or we just simply want to adopt those as a matter of function and trust on staff's part that the minutes are accurate.
Either option is available to you. Whatever you're most comfortable with, either one you can take to adopt them as a matter of course, or to defer until Councilman Tinajero is present.
You know, I know I'm being a little bit of a stickler, but why don't we go ahead and put this one over for the council member to come here? He can take a look at it. He was present. He chaired that committee, and he can give us his lead as I did on the former matter. So
That's reasonable, sure.
okay, now we're moving along to the legislative scorecard, and I believe that's Mr. Lawrence's matter. Mr. Lawrence, you have the floor.
Thank you, council member. So what we're doing today is presenting the City of Santa Ana 2016 Federal and State Legislative Platform Scorecard. So that's essentially how did we do from last year's platform. Just for Councilmember Solorio's understanding, I don't believe we had this when Councilmember Solorio was here in his first term a few years back. But we developed a legislative platform that ties with our strategic plan, and it allows us to share that with our partners and mainly our federal and state lobbyists. And it's really kind of a roadmap to what we want to do in any given year in terms of seeking funding, supporting legislation, opposing legislation. And with that, you'll see that on page 1, there is an introduction and then guiding principles. So I just want to quickly highlight preserving local control, promoting fiscal stability, supporting funding opportunities, and regional collaboration and cooperation. So that's kind of what guides us. I'm not going to go through this verbatim. I'm going to just kind of high level highlight some areas that I think are important. If you have any questions, please let us know, and we have staff here to respond. Under Goal 1, community safety, body cameras, that program began in February of 2017, and a vendor was selected, and I don't have an idea of how we're doing yet with that. It's fairly new, but we do have Deputy Chief Schnabel here who could answer any questions you might have. In terms of the Santa Ana Police Department applied for 2016 community-oriented policing services grants, and we were awarded 3 years in a row in 2016. And Holland and Knight deserves a lot of credit for that. They just did a fantastic job at helping us secure funding. The other issue to highlight is the Santa Ana Police Department received Urban Area Security Initiative funding totaling $5.43 million. Again, kudos to Holland and Knight. They've done a great job for the city. The other area that's important is homelessness. And if you look at page 2 and 3, you'll see that there are a variety of funding and programs that the city has established to mitigate homelessness in the city. If you go beyond that, we're also highlighting medical marijuana, which obviously is very important. And then, of course, going into the whole issue of recreational marijuana use. And we're working with our lobbyists in Sacramento, Townsend Public Affairs. They've been doing a great job at keeping the city informed and advocating for our interests in terms of maintaining local control as it relates to medical marijuana and recreational use. At the federal level on medical marijuana, one thing to point out is there has been some discussion about the Attorney General Sessions talking about becoming more aggressive in terms of enforcing in states and localities. And H&K is working with a variety of cities to defend local control over those issues, and predominantly the Controlled Substance Act. So we don't know, how that's going to play out, but that's definitely on our radar screen. Moving on is safe mobility is a very important concern for the city, police department, public works agency, and we have a variety of programs and funding we've been seeking to promote safe mobility. Certainly given the density of our population, the number of pedestrians that we have in our community. Going on to page 6, you'll see that we have immigration reform. Goes without saying, it's just a major topic for our city as well as other cities in California and throughout the country. Let me just highlight, in terms of the city, at the December 6th council meeting, 2016, as you all know, we adopted the resolution declaring the city as a sanctuary for all its residents, regardless of their immigration status. Townsend Public Affairs has been very helpful in keeping us informed at the state level. I'm not sure if everyone's aware, but SB 54, which was passed out of committee yesterday, would declare essentially the state a sanctuary state.
Was it passed out of the Senate or a committee?
Passed out of the Senate.
Senate. And so TPA has been helping us all along with that, and Holland and Knight is very much engaged in keeping us informed and working with our city and other cities to protect our residents, and given the Trump administration's policies that are being proposed for immigration, undocumented residents. Moving on to Goal 2, which is on page 8, we have parks, and this is youth education and recreation. We have a tremendous amount of work that we've done. In fact, I think there's almost 3 pages that Parks Library has done, all for the benefit of youth education, recreational programs. I don't want to go through everything, but just the highlights is, of course, last year we had the funding, over $1 million for the Memory Lane Park, which was completed on June 30th. And then we also were awarded $5 million Prop 84 money, and that was for the Roosevelt Walker School Site Joint Use Agreement. Townsend Public Affairs continues to work with us on AB 2444. It was the proposed legislative park bond, and we are, seeking, as part of that, the city is seeking funding for the Santa Ana River Conservancy program. And I know that the mayor mentioned that at I think the second to last council meeting as something he thought very important to the city. So again, I'm not going to go through all of these unless you have questions. If we get to page 10, there's affordable housing. The city issued an RFP for $1.2 million in home investment partnership program funds and awarded the funds to a project which provides 71 units of permanent supportive housing for homeless individuals. There was also the city's housing opportunity ordinance. The city executed a pre-commitment for $2.6 million of inclusionary housing in lieu for a 69-unit affordable housing project. The city also executed a loan agreement for $1.8 million for a 57-unit affordable housing project. Moving on to page 12. Actually, we can go further than that. Page 13. The big issue right now in terms of CDBG is that funding is under a threat of going away. So with our lobbyists at Holland and Knight, we're working feverishly to protect those monies and funding for the future. And in the interest of time, I will fast forward to Goal 6, page 19, and the OC streetcar. Obviously a very important project for the city. And again, H&K is just playing a very critical role in working with OCTA and with the city in ensuring that we keep whatever funding that we have and we secure as much funding for the project is necessary. It's tricky because the president's skinny budget, I think, eliminated that funding, and I know that we're looking that we'll get it on the back end when this goes to vote with Congress and appropriations. I think that pretty much sums everything up. There are a few other projects. One last very thing I wanted to mention is the clerk of the council's office, along with IT, is really working hard on developing an open data platform for the city, and we'll see that in the 2017 platform. But they've been moving forward on that, and we're working hard at that. So, with that, do you have any questions?
Very good. Thank you. I'll open it up to the council member and the committee.
So this is just largely a review of past and I guess some current efforts.
Yeah, and what you'll notice, council member, is that on the 2016-2017, you'll see a lot of the same projects and programs because they're multi-year.
Right. Sounds good.
Yeah.
It's great.
Work.
Yeah, I just want to give thanks, and I know we have the principal from Townsend Public Affairs and Dan Maldonado and maybe Leslie Polner from Holland and Knight at this point. I just wanted to thank them and our staff and all of the department heads for working very, very hard last year. I think we made some exceptional strides, and I know we took some advocacy trips to Washington with the former chair of the Public Safety Committee and myself, and to Washington, and we were able to come back with money for COPS grants, money for UASI, and I think for COPS, I think it was a third year in a row. I think for UASI, we got the maximum amount allowed. So there was just a lot of very good work, and the great work that Townsend Public Affairs did for us in Sacramento, securing some of our active streets monies was very, very important, and we made good use of those. I mean, you're talking about the park on Memory Lane. We're talking about some of the good work that we did in the clerk of the council's office to do a immigration, was it a naturalization and citizenship forum where we had almost 800 people attend. So a lot of very good things in public works and parks. So it was a very, very solid, robust year of being very aggressive on looking for funding. So I want to thank our legislative partners for that, and again, our in-house staff for doing such good work. And I think I'm hoping we're going to be as successful, but again, we have to manage our expectations. We know that the environment is much different now, but that just means that we have to work that much harder and be that much more assertive.
Thank you, council member. I'm glad that you said that, and I'd also like to personally thank city manager's office staff. All of the departments in the city worked very hard, and Julie Castro Cardenas and especially Yasmin Vasquez deserve kudos for putting this together. Great job. And of course, we couldn't have done it without the support of our acting city manager, Gerardo Moet. Yeah. Our lobbyists have been fantastic to work with, both Holland and Knight and Townsend Public Affairs.
Yeah. And I know that there was some question about, our committee's valuable. Well, this committee worked very hard for these achievements with the departments and with our legislative partners. So there is value, and what I always like to do, not just a scorecard, but sometimes you almost quantify the monies that were brought in, and it really justifies the time, the effort, the value that's brought to us by advocacy, legislative advocacy. So it's really important for a city like ours because we compete well for grant funding, and we've got some great advocates on our behalf. So let's go ahead and in the interest of time, let's move on to the platform. And you said,
just one last item as I'm also looking at the proposed schedule. This perhaps may be the last legislative affairs council committee before Mark Lawrence doesn't leave the city, but we'll be coming back in different capacities as a visitor or as a volunteer. I want to, personally take this time to thank Mark Lawrence for his great work. This past calendar year that really reflects a lot of the outcomes in this report. But I also want to really just thank him for, really a strong career here at City Hall with many accomplishments through various city managers, various council members, good budget years, bad budget years, both in Sacramento and in DC. So you have my heartfelt thanks for the great effort you put in this past year, but every year as well. Let's give them a big round of applause. Thank you. Thank you so much, Mike.
Wow, thank you. Now it feels real. Now it feels like I'm really going. Thank you so much.
So, Mark, I was going to embarrass you at the end of the meeting, but I guess we'll go ahead and embarrass you now. Maybe I'll save some comments for later. But obviously, I agree with everything that's said about the hard work. But we've got a little bit of time. We might be able to convince you otherwise. So
Special meeting.
But the great thing is that you're leaving a legacy, and so we hope that a lot of the folks that have worked with you are going to carry on the great work that you've done. It still doesn't seem real that you're not going to be part of this organization because you've just been such a steady fixture here, and in times of some real change, you've been that steadying force.
Well, council members, thank you both, and I feel very humbled, and I couldn't have done much of what I accomplished without all the great employees and our partners over the years.
Well, before we get more weepy and all of us start doing testimonials and we start roasting you, let's move on because I know we're on a timeline as well. Because we have plenty of time to say goodbyes, and I'm sure we're all gonna gonna say great things. But moving along to item number 7, which is a legislative platform, I think that's yours again, Mr. Lawrence.
Yeah, and unless council members you have specific issues you want to talk about or things that maybe you would like to see included that were not included, we're open to that. I'm not going to spend much time on this.
I think if you could just highlight any things that are different from the prior year's platform, and I'm sure the Councilmember Samirto has some ideas or priorities for this year. I know I have just some things I want to highlight of things that I think we should be watching.
Sure. So just like in terms of body cameras, obviously we've begun that program. So now we're looking to seek funding opportunities to fund the evaluation of how the program does and how it goes. So that's something we're going to be looking at. Homelessness, just continues to be a major challenge for us, and we're going to continue to seek funding and look for opportunities to mitigate homelessness. Medical marijuana, recreational marijuana continues to be on our radar. Immigration is huge, and that's going to be front and center for the city, especially for the mayor and city council. I'm kind of going through this, Councilmember Solorio, and trying to see if there's anything that stands out that is different. I know maybe on page 6, when we talk about transportation infrastructure funding, we all know that the governor has proposed a tax increase, gas tax increase. So that's something that I believe the city is very interested in supporting because of our infrastructure needs. And that's something that will be happening here in 2017. Also, again, in 2017, on page 7, is to preserve tax-exempt municipal bonds. Congress and the administration will be considering tax reform, and the city opposes any effort to eliminate or alter tax-exempt municipal bonds for obvious reasons. Just moving along, water conservation continues to be a priority. OC streetcar, community engagement, voter registration. The Santa Ana Regional Transportation Center is in dire need of funding for infrastructure there, and we are going to continue to seek funding on that. So I think to answer your question, it's essentially a lot of it is the same, but it's just continued efforts to seek funding or to support legislation or oppose legislation that will impact our ability to meet these objectives.
Thank you, Mr. Lawrence. And before I bring it back to the committee and bring it back to some comments and maybe some additional suggestions, is there any of the department heads that feel compelled or strongly about maybe something that we should give more attention to, maybe something that's been omitted speak now or forever hold your peace. But start with the acting city manager.
As I understand, Townsend might be able to confirm this, the possibility of a park bond is still very much in play. I think that's a big opportunity. It's in the billions. And then, of course, with the comparison between 16 and 17, kind of the world has changed with regards to the potential risk on federal monies. So there has to be a lot of work in making sure that we protect our federal monies. And then the medical marijuana and that industry is always something changing, and there's always going to be interesting challenges. I'm thinking those three things for sure. In addition to, I share the interest on the Santa Ana River Conservancy because I know there's been some changes on the possibility of more direct funding. But I think it should be a great, fun year. A lot of good work to be done, and a lot of defense, and a lot of proactive efforts to get more resources.
A lot of retention efforts. Anybody else? I thought I saw a hand. No hands? All right, maybe hands. Go ahead.
I just wanted to reemphasize basically two projects. One is Sartec, that I think has got an opportunity to really get developed, and we can bring tenancy there, and it would be a start of OC streetcar. It's very critical projects for us to really pay attention to in terms of getting what we need to improve that. And also another project, infrastructure project that is critical is the Sartec grade separation. It's right on after the train station. That not only is a really safety-related project, but also opens up that whole area to new developments and a whole lot of opportunities that may bring that is not available right now. So those are the two projects that I would reemphasize and kind of see what's available out there.
Thank you, Fred. And I know all the department heads had a chance to opine and provide input on this, so your priorities are reflected, but to the extent there's an opportunity maybe to embellish or maybe to add things, I just wanted to open it up. But I'll bring it back to the committee. And go ahead,
Thank
Johnson.
you very much, Councilmember. Three items, three things. Sorry. On three things in particular that we're very concerned with. First, the elimination of the CDBG program. This is a $5.2 million recurring source of funds that have create great, very positive improvements to our community. The elimination of that program would devastate various parts of our community, and we strongly oppose any elimination of those funds. The second, the President's proposed cuts to our Housing Choice Voucher Program funding, particularly any proposals by the President to cut funding for sanctuary cities. We assist 2,700 families with our Section 8 vouchers. Hundreds of wonderful elderly families and people with disabilities, and those cuts, those families will be their lives would be severely impacted by any proposed cuts to those funds, and I just want to highlight that. And then the third is that I believe that the new administration, particularly in tandem with Paul Ryan's plan to prosperity, to reduce poverty, is going to focus on self-sufficiency requirements and work requirements for Section 8 voucher holders and public housing residents. And any draconian or very severe policy making that without taking into consideration the kind of impacts that it would have on the families would be devastating to our housing authorities and to the families in particular. And so the solution that policymakers at the federal level should be focusing on is on something called our Family Self-Sufficiency Program. It's not very well funded. et al. Receives $75 million per year from HUD. And if the federal government, if HUD and the new presidential administration wants to focus on self-sufficiency, they should triple or quadruple the funding for that self-sufficiency program to give us the tools to support our families to become self-sufficient. Just those 3 items.
Thank you. Thank
Yes,
you,
sir.
Judson. That being said, I'll bring it back to the committee and I'll open it up for discussion. Councilmember?
Yeah, I have just some things as I'm kind of thinking what's on the list and what might be some priority for the years, and just preliminary in nature. Number one is, that the legislature is working on the budget for the next fiscal year, and we need to just kind of be mindful if there's any opportunities for cities, large cities in particular, and the draft platform mentioned the areas that are important for us. So I think we want to hear about any new things in the state budget that may be opportunities for the city, and maybe we might want to do letters to our legislative delegation of things we like in the post-May revised budget, so we can tell them what we like and what we don't like. So I think that would be good. And I don't know if we have a regular process for letters of support or opposition that may need to come up from time to time. I don't know how we handle that, whether it's something that our city manager signs, our mayor signs. I know individual council members can, freely do that as well. But and just in a simple way, because I have a lot of things to share. But how do we go about letters?
So, Councilmember, that's a good question. We've had different variations of that in the last couple of years because of all the changes we've had. But essentially, the previous Ledge Committee agreed and the council agreed that staff could do letters of support or opposition on issues that would impact the city. We would copy the mayor and council as long as they fit with the platform and they fit with the strategic plan.
That's fair enough. And so I think, a letter regarding the budget might be an idea. In terms of just different areas of interest to me personally, and I think to the city as well, on the public safety front, we continue to have an interest in fighting gangs, and so anything to do enforcement in that area or gang prevention in that area, that would be important. Similar with reentry services, and I know there's at least one bill in that area. We also recently did a trip to Sacramento, where we met with some folks from CDCR regarding the possibility of some of their reentry services being able to be placed in our Santa Ana City Jail. I know we discussed doing a follow-up letter inviting them. They did want to come and see our facility and see what kind of reentry services for females or males may be important. In the overall youth and crime prevention programs are important. And similar to youth, parks on the whole tend to be kind of a youth-oriented endeavor. So I agree that needs to be a focus. And as our acting city manager said, there is an active park bond bill or two that we ought to care about and send letters of support of, and maybe provide some suggestions. And I know in the past, too, we have also said that we want resources not just for cities, but also joint use opportunities with schools, and making sure that there's appropriate language in the bills for that. Water continues to be an area of interest, and I know at a recent council meeting, for example, I had highlighted that on the whole we're doing pretty well in our city, but we do need more sections of the city that can have recycled water pipelines, especially that may feed our medians and our parks. The homelessness crisis is real in Santa Ana. We just got to look out the window. We know that's a real issue, and I know that there's several bills on that, as well as possible grant opportunities, so we need to be vigilant there. And there's an overlap with mental health issues and needs, and so we got to watch that. And in particular, I know that Senator Morlock has a bill to repurpose in Costa Mesa. There's the Fairview Developmental Center that really is kind of shrinking in terms of its core needs, and so it's a big state-owned piece of land, and there may be an interest there for the senator working with the city of Costa Mesa to have some mental health facilities there as well as other uses, and I think we ought to care about that and weigh in there. On the transportation front, I like this idea of the regional transportation center and looking at the grade separation as a funding priority. And one area to look at maybe is with the High-Speed Rail Commission. You know, they had promised Southern California that all the money wouldn't be spent in Northern California and the Central Valley, and they did, have an MOU with Southern California agencies to invest dollars down here. And there's a couple of grade separation projects that have been thought about, but I don't think that this has ever come up. And high-speed rail, maybe short term, won't go as far down as Santa Ana, but it might be something worthwhile thinking about. The tax measure, I know it's a little bit complicated, and they're trying to finish up some work on that potentially this week. I don't know if we already have a position on that or we've taken similar positions. Definitely cars are getting more fuel efficient. There's zero emission vehicles, less money's coming in, but there's a lot of folks that just generally aren't excited about taxes. And I know I did a Facebook post just forwarding an article, and I got a lot of negative comments from my constituents. So I know there's not a big appetite or eager appetite to tax themselves more. So I don't know if we should maybe watch those bills a little bit more or offer up to our legislators ideas of what might make it more palatable. I know the mayor made comments that it's really going to grow our local revenues, and it might some, but maybe we need to say it needs to be more, or maybe grade separations. They may not be able to easily get the 2/3 vote, so there might be, even some local legislators that need one more idea to put in the bill to make them feel more comfortable. So I don't know that we should just out of the gate say, yeah, we want to do these bills. This may be an opportunity to feature some projects that we care about. And even though there are supposed to be some big votes literally as we speak, some of these actions are going to drag on. I don't know if our Public Works Director has any thoughts on how these tax measures will impact us. I think it's SB1 and AB1. I think are the numbers or thereabouts.
And one of them is the gas tax related one that would impact us in a big way. And right now we probably get about $4.5 million
additional.
A year. We need $16 million just to maintain our status.
Do most public works directors in the county? They're generally all pretty supportive of it.
Yes,
or?
they are.
Okay.
Because that would generate a good portion of it. I think, or some portion of it was supposed to come to local agencies to improve their, the transportation infrastructure.
Got it. Thank you. Another transportation bill that's out there that I just read about this morning, and I don't know if it's the senator's bill or an OCTA sponsored bill, but Senator Janet Nguyen has SB 264 that relates to the 405 and the high occupancy toll lanes that OCTA with Caltrans will install, and she has a measure that would say that essentially net surplus dollars can be used along the corridor for sure, and some for outside the corridor, but she has percentages of who gets how much, and there would be like 10% for cities outside the corridor, as she's mentioned, at 10%, and maybe that's not enough. Maybe it needs to be 15%, or maybe OCTA share needs to be a little bit broader so that it doesn't all just go to cities like Huntington Beach and Westminster and one or two others. So if staff can really take a good look at that, and maybe if we could check with OCTA to see is Is it OCT's bill? Is it the senator's bill? And we may want to weigh in there. And then something that I don't know there's any legislation on now, but I know there's legislative support for it, is this idea of light rail system, mainly focused on South LA, but that would come into Orange County, potentially along the PE right-of-way, called the Eco Rapid system. And with MTA, having gotten approval for this tax measure that's forever. It's infinite. It's not 20 or 30 years. It's forever. There really may be funding to work on that, and with the prospect of the LA Olympics in 2024, Mayor Garcetti is interested in not doing it over the next 20 years, but doing it before 2024, assuming that LA gets chosen. I think LA is in the top 2 or 3, so it's a very real possibility. But because they would need to come into Orange County, they're going to need some local support. And I don't know if the city in the past has taken any formal role with respect to that body, but that might be something that at a certain point our public works director and government relations staff can look at our involvement with that. And then I know there's ongoing concern about things like sober living homes, group homes, and how we regulate them. And it's a sticky wicket, but something we ought to look about and weigh in if there's anything that makes sense. And then on the federal level, CDBG, that's important. Protecting federal funding overall, especially if the intent is to punish so-called sanctuary cities. And then the final comment that I have for now, and it really just relates to the schedule and reporting, but maybe once a year we can have our lead lobbyists for both agencies do like an in-person meeting. I know Casey is here, and I know Corey from the local TP office is here, but maybe once a year we can also have Christopher Townsend attend, and same meeting or separate meeting have somebody from our federal advocacy team. I think that would be good. Thank you.
Thank you, council member. And before I make a few remarks, the acting city manager, you had a comment?
Just a possible thought with regards to Councilman Solorio, when you were mentioning that maybe there can be some kind of opportunity in some of the, I think you were mentioning the gas tax as it moves forward. It's always been, Santa Ana has always been seen as having a lot of bus ridership, and an opportunity perhaps to also engage with OCTA with regards to, and then the mayor mentioned something about how we consume very little bit of water. Well, there's already a lot of credit that this community should get for being environmentally proactive. A lot of people take the bus, et cetera, yet we have lots of challenges with bus routes and affordability and bus routes reduction, that maybe there could be some way, since as you take transit, you end up helping with the goal of alternative fuels and reducing gas emissions. So there could be opportunities in legislation as they're being formulated on getting credit, similar to like when you mention joint use for park bond. Park and Rec has a lot of experience in competing, and frequently you get a lot of points when there's lack of parks, but you should also get points when there is joint use opportunities in competing for monies. There's never been, to my knowledge, any kind of weighting system for projects that are mutually beneficial to both the school and in the city with regards to joint use. I think it's time for Sacramento to recognize that there are special communities that really don't have a place to increase parks because they're built out, and therefore joint use should be incentivized to have more ability to compete for joint use. And it's sort of what I'm trying to get at with regards to the bus ridership and OCTA, because there continues to be a dwindling of bus riding opportunities because it's a system that has to pay for itself, supposedly. But it would be nice if there could be some kind of wise encouragement from Sacramento to to encourage people to continue taking or rewarding those communities that already help with gas emissions. And the final thing that I haven't heard talked about is that I heard I was impressed with a business property owner who on their own invested with 3G fiber in their building. And it turned out that they took a risk, and it turned out it paid pretty good dividends without any kind of government help. It would be nice for government to figure out how to encourage and reward or motivate business people, property owners that help with the digital divide, not just for business, but there could be opportunities for the wider community benefit with regards to Wi-Fi and a variety of those things, especially for built-out cities that have older infrastructure that need to catch up with regards to fiber or just just high speed, whatever the technology ends up being. I think those are really good things for our town to think about, for our public affairs and our California League of City Partners to think about on specific needs for our town.
Thank you, Mr. Acting City Manager. And in the interest of time, I know that we have some constraints. We may lose our quorum, so I'm going to be very brief. And I was very heartened to hear Councilmember Solorio recite a lot of what is in the platform. So I'm glad that he mentioned some other things that are also time sensitive, and that's kind of where I wanted to go. I think our platform is solid, it's comprehensive, but there's some things that are very time sensitive that we may need to prioritize, may need to emphasize with our legislative advocacy firms that we really do need to move on quickly, right? So there's some exposure, obviously, with respect to the whole sanctuary city issue. So that's something new that wasn't part of our platform in 2016. And so that really changed everything because it exposes grant funding that we've been relying on. It exposes funding that through the Department of Justice may create some tension for us. So to the extent that H&K continues to monitor it closely, and I think we heard the city attorney last night speaking about how she continues to work with other departments in other cities similarly situated. I think we can certainly band together with other cities, and I believe there's even a bill. I think it's AB 440 by Gibson, talking about how the state can help those cities that have declared themselves sanctuary cities with some fiscal relief. So I think it's it hasn't been heard in committee yet. It's something that's out there, but I'm glad that the state is talking about that type of relief for cities that have been valiant and courageous and have large undocumented population. And so I think it's important for us to consider those bills that are circulating. I also want to make sure that our partners understand that affordable housing is also very time sensitive because we see that the crisis in our community is very real. As I mentioned last night, the mayor of San Diego made a sort of an unsolicited effort to just try to expedite the entitlement process for no other reason except for the fact that families are now becoming homeless as a result of this rental crisis, right? And a lot of people are being displaced, moving outside the city, and the last thing we want is for our families to have to move east to the Inland Empire if we can provide alternatives and options for them here. Medical marijuana and adult use, marijuana, obviously another time sensitivity because we know that the state is going to be creating a structure and a system by January 2018, I believe, is when everything is slated to trigger. So I know a lot of cities are moving in advance because I believe that whatever cities adopt prior to January 2018 will be honored and respected by the state and almost, grandfathered in, if we can use that term loosely. But that's something that we may want to consider. I know this council's talked about it and this committee's talked about looking at some of the other ancillary industries to the retail side. So we tackled the dispensary collective side of it, but we never really broached the subject of the manufacturing, maybe the wholesale side, which is cultivation. But that's part of the industry that doesn't have the secondary impacts that a dispensary has. I mean, there's not the public safety element to those for the most part, because it's not a customer-based driven. It's more of a delivery, for individual retail operators. So that's something that we may want to consider as well. And just generally, a lot of the issues that were already previously mentioned, I'm not going to reiterate. I think public safety, obviously important. We need to make sure that we seek funding resources there. But I would also suggest that there seems to be sort of a pivot that we have to make from very heavy advocacy at the federal level, because we had friends, at the administration who really helped us do well in some of these grant proposals that we submitted. Unfortunately, I don't think our grant proposals are going to be as well received now at the federal level. So maybe what we do is we become top heavy with a lot of our state efforts. So I, really want to put the onus on, Townsend Public Affairs, and I know they're going to step up, and I know that already they've come to us with some successes on the active streets, and they look like they're positioning us well for parks money. So I just want to lean on them a little bit more, and I want to kind of direct our staff to do that as well, because we have friends at the state. I mean, we have a former assembly member here on the council that can help us with his relationships and his contacts. But at the same time, I think this city, again, competes well. And I think because we've, taken, good, courageous steps that are very consistent with the leadership. And on that, on SB 54, I would like us to consider doing a letter of support, because it's gone through the Senate and it's a real bill. It's gonna, it's obviously crossed one major hurdle. I think with some of the concessions that were made in the language in that legislation, I think it'll be successful in the Assembly as well. But nonetheless, I think what it does is it shows some consistency with the position that we have, with the position that the leadership has in Sacramento. And I commend Senator De Leon. He's been a fierce warrior and somebody who I think has inspired all of us on that front. So I think that's it. Oh, just one last thing. I know on the universal legal representation, I know that's an issue that's still pending before us. It hasn't come back to us, I think, with some specific recommendations, but to the extent that there are any monies that are out there for that, or any shared benefits or resources that we can work with others on, that's certainly something that's going to be real important. And I think that's it. And it's good to have those comments for our friends who are listening. I think Chris Townsend may have disengaged already, but hopefully Casey, you can go ahead and deliver that. Chris, are you there?
I'm still here.
All right. So you heard me. I said we're going to lean on you, man.
Oh yeah, I'm used to it though, because they used to do it all the time when he was on.
All right. Well, good. He's back. All right. So, Councilmember.
Yeah, just some additional comments, a couple items that you mentioned, and then something related to what the city manager had mentioned. SB 54 is a big bill with a lot of things in there. I myself am overall in support of it. But if there are any areas of concern that we have or suggestions that we have with the bill, those should be shared with the council, and particularly included in the letter, as well as there'll be a lot of ongoing amendments to that bill. So we got to watch that closely. On the universal representation bill or issue, Senator Westwood has a bill to try to identify some resources to share with counties and cities. So that I think too would be a good bill to do a letter of support on. And then City Manager Moet raised a good point, and it may be more of a federal opportunity than a state opportunity. If it's a federal opportunity, it's probably a little bit harder. But I know that there's some kind of government rate for Wi-Fi or fiber for school districts. E-rate.
Yes.
Maybe, again, it may be more federal than state. If we can make that definition be a little bit broader, so we can go deeper into the communities, or to also include parks or in high density, high poverty areas, because that's a tremendous value. I think you can get like 95% off your cable bill.
That's right.
or
Correct.
internet bill, so that if you want to offer,
Jack is working on our library Wi-Fi because it qualifies because it's education.
Right.
But you're very
in terms
on
of
point.
if either in terms of radius or definition or the type of cities, is that like a federal definition and program? Is it state? Is it utility based?
I'm not sure if it's federal or state, but it does only apply right now to school districts and libraries.
Right.
So the city hadn't been taking advantage of it. We are going to start taking advantage of it this year. We just applied and I believe got approved for it. It does give us 90% off, but it is restricted to just the footprint of libraries.
Right.
So we have a few facilities, parks facilities, that we've now made branch libraries and park facilities so that we can, at least in the portion of the library portion, get the cheaper Wi-Fi there. And it also applies to some of the networking equipment and infrastructure we need. So we'll get some discounts on those. But I agree 100%. If that can be broadened,
That could be broadened,
That would
or
be
maybe it's
excellent
something
for
through the
us.
CPUC, and that thing could be something that our legislative advocates can help us work on.
That'd be wonderful.
I think that'd be a big deal for our community.
Great. So I think staff, I think our partners on the line and here in committee have heard us all, and I think that's a good exhaustive list. And I think had Councilmember Tinajero been here, I think it would have been even a longer list and it would have been a longer meeting. So I'm glad that we've been brief. But again, let's just keep our eye on the ball on things that are immediate and things that need to be expedited. So that's, I think, important. So why don't I go ahead and, if we have I guess it would be number 8 would be our federal update. Mr. Lawrence, do you want to bring on Leslie and Dan?
Yeah, Leslie, Dan, go ahead, and if you want to begin on your legislative summary.
Right, thank you. Really appreciate it. This has been a very thorough discussion of, the priorities. Clearly there are certain issues like the housing issues, including also the New Starts issue that affects other cities that clearly in coalition is an important way to weigh into some of these issues while we're at the same time trying to make sure that our funding levels are preserved as much as possible. Clearly, the other issues around immigration and sanctuary cities is something that we're very much involved in, very active on. And again, there are other cities that have also designated themselves as sanctuary cities. A lot depends on how you define that, whether you fall into a situation that could result in possible defunding of Department of Justice programs, Department of Homeland Security, and potentially, perhaps maybe other grant programs. But the definition right now is very unclear, and they're focused more on using the ICE detainer request denials as sort of the evidence. All of that is, of course, being contested in the courts by San Francisco and Seattle.
Yep.
So.
And of course, Ninth Circuit will be hearing appeals on the Hawaii case starting in May.
Right. So let me, we provided two updates. One was an earlier update that's dated February 13, and then a more recent one, given a lot of stuff that had happened between that time and now. And so I'd like to turn it over to Leslie to quickly run through some of the highlights of that, because I think setting the stage about where we are in the budget process and its impact, as well as where we are with immigration and the streetcar funding, is very important. So, and we can get into more details around the specific funding priorities.
So as Dan, and I'm sure as you've seen in the news, part of what makes this particular, the budget and appropriations cycle, so confusing and so challenging to explain when you're not in D.C. right now is that you have two cycles that are happening at once. And so just as a reminder, the federal fiscal year starts on October 1st and runs through September 30th. And so we're already, many months into the 2017 fiscal year. Last year, Congress never was able to reach any kind of resolution on a funding package to fund fiscal year 2017. And so they passed what's known as a continuing resolution, or a CR. And so it basically kept level funding at the previous year, 2016 levels. That CR expires April 28th. And if Congress isn't able to come to some kind of agreement by April 28th, you could potentially see a government shutdown happening. There are negotiations underway. Many of the bills for FY17 had already, there was agreement reached on many of the bills. There was packages ready to go. And so many of those bills are remaining intact. And the question really comes down to, does Republican leadership want to attach either policy provisions that would be very controversial, things like defunding Planned Parenthood? Does Republican leadership...
Christopher Townsend is now exiting.
He's just left the building.
Does Republican leadership want to, cede to President Trump's request to include additional funding for the border wall? And so these are the kinds of things that they are trying to figure out right now, and will have a significant impact on whether or not we see an FY17 funding package, or whether or not we see a government shutdown. In the meantime, just as all of this is happening, we still need to deal with 2018. And so what you saw in March was the president released the 2018, what's known as the skinny budget. And for all intents and purposes, really under any administration, whether it was President Trump or President Obama, the president's budget is really more of a vision document and almost more of a political document than an actual policy document. But we will say that and the skinny budget in particular, which lacks all detail, it's really just sort of very, very thin sort of policy pronouncements. But that said, the vision that was laid out by President Trump is disturbing and has major implications, if it were enacted for cities. And so the budget proposes, a number of things that would not be great for Santa Ana. Things like eliminating the home and CDBG program, things like phasing out the capital investment grant program, which is where New Starts funding, which is so critical for the Orange County streetcar, would come from. And so there are things that are very, very concerning, and things that have indicated, and as we are doing, as Dan alluded to, working in close coalition with other cities, with other organizations, really working also with a number of folks in rural places as well as with the private sector, because as important as mobilizing with cities are, I think for speaking to a Republican audience, it's really important to have more rural areas and private sector partners to help make our messages more compelling. And so in the meantime, the president is expected to release a more thorough, detailed budget in May. And in the meantime as well, House and Senate are at the very early stages of starting to put together FY18 appropriations bills. An added factor that makes things complicated for FY18, many of you will remember sequestration, which came after failed negotiations between President Obama and House leadership several years ago. That set out certain spending caps that are very, very difficult. Those are supposed to take effect again this year. So many pieces of the puzzle, many things that are not resolved yet for 2018. But to Dan's point earlier, we are working in close concert with a number of partners, particularly on the housing and transportation fronts, to make the case of how important these programs are for jobs across the country, not just in blue cities.
I would add public safety because that's another
That's
piece.
exactly, yeah,
That's
absolutely.
Homeland Security. Those are also in coalition. Going back to the FY17 piece of appropriations, and this goes back to the championing of the streetcar project by Senator Feinstein. She's been in the forefront of this, going back into the Obama administration, making sure that the project was moving forward and it was getting listed in that administration, and that funding was being put on the table. In light of the new administration now, with Trump as president, she is again, even though the funding for that in his budget would cut the FY17 dollars as well as the FY18 dollars for the project. We want to make sure that the new starts, which includes Santa Ana, that there's funding for that. And so we've been working very closely with Senator Feinstein's office and with her to ensure that funding will be available for that project. Recently, we had, I think about 2 weeks ago, here at Aldo, we had a conference call with Trevor Higgins, her transportation appropriations expert, to discuss with the mayor and also the OCTA's, the head of OCTA, Daryl Johnson, just where we are in the process. And he has indicated that they're doing everything possible to try to include funding for the project in FY17 as well as FY18.
The other piece, just on, again, the New Starts comes from the Capital Investment Grant Program, and so we've been engaged in a very large coalition-building effort, working to mobilize support on both the House side and the Senate side. We put together a letter on the House that ended up with nearly 100 members. It was bipartisan. Congressman Correa did sign on to the letter to support the Capital Investment Grants Program. And then on the Senate side, they are continuing to work to get a Republican. But as of now, we have 30 senators led by Senator Feinstein, Senator Murray from Washington State, and Senator Durbin from Illinois. And they, as of now, have 30 senators. They're working hard to get a Republican. We're trying to help them. Again, it's slightly more challenging in the Senate. But it's good to have this kind of show of support for this program for 2018.
The other piece that I think there's been considerable discussion about, and that we feel, as given the leadership that Santa Ana has taken as a sanctuary city, that we keep you really fully informed and involved as these various initiatives from the Trump administration occur, and that we anticipate, the next move on some of these things. Clearly, without going into a lot of detail, on the travel ban, as you're aware of, there was a restraining order that was issued by the federal judge in Hawaii and elsewhere, and that has been extended. So that program is not going anywhere in particular, even though there's extreme vetting now is going on in those countries in terms of any visas being issued. But I think the other troublesome area for the city and for other cities that really care about the residents and immigrants, that the movement from the Obama effort to make sure that any enforcement actions in the interior are done in a respectful and in a fairly reasonable manner. So they created what they call the Priority Enforcement Program to zero in on the criminals and to make sure that the threshold that would be used would be based on probable cause. with the Trump administration, that has been removed, and they have brought back the old Secure Communities program, which has a much lower threshold, which is based on reasonable suspicion. So I think that we're going to continue to see a lot of these immigration raids as very problematic in the interior. And we just need to be vigilant about that. Obviously, we've got members on both the House and Senate that are concerned about this and are trying to watch and ask the critical questions with regard to enforcement on that. Sanctuary cities is another area of deep concern. As I mentioned before, how you define sanctuary cities is yet to be done. It's clearly not in the law, so it's more of a term of art, if anything, and meaning anything to anybody. But the way it's being currently interpreted under current statutes is that if there is a denial by a jurisdiction that has authority to make such a denial of a ICE detainer request, that then obviously you're on the list as one of those jurisdictions that have refused to cooperate.
And so, so you saw, I think, recently, Attorney General Sessions, not really any new information, but really restating, that cities that were not in compliance with Section 1373 would not be eligible to receive DOJ funding, and so that would be things like SCAP funding, COPS funding, BURN. And so, again, remains to be seen how this actually ends up getting implemented, but did mention that recently. There does seem to be, I will just note that there is some disagreement between Secretary Kelly, at least our understanding in private conversations, between Secretary Kelly and AG Sessions on how they want to enforce this program, which in some ways works to our advantage, I think.
Yeah, I think it does. For Santa Ana, obviously, you have, I think the estimate is about $7 million in DOJ grants. And I don't think that includes the Iwansi grant. There is an exception provided in the statute about for law enforcement purposes, but how that would be carried out is another question. But again, it's the trigger right now is where there's the denial of ICE detainer request. I'm not sure that Santa Ana falls within that threshold. So even in declaring yourself a sanctuary city, you may be okay for the moment. And certainly this issue has not been raised with regard to the streetcar project. And in part, I would gather because it is an OCTA project that's being pushed.
So Dan and Leslie, let me.
And the work that we're doing on the streetcar is done fully in coordination with OCTA.
Got it. Dan, I just wanted to break in here real quickly because I know you're going to wrap it up, but before I lose this thread, on two things, I know that when you talked about sanctuary cities and the exposure that we have to funds, grant funding, DOJ funding, I think that's important for us to try to quantify and for us to have an understanding of line items, right, that may be exposed. To the extent that you work with our staff and see what appears to be at risk, that would be helpful. Also, I think your discussion on how the administration is going to identify cities as sanctuaries and therefore, and maybe, as targets. To me, I guess what I think I even mentioned it last night at the council meeting was, some cities have self-labeled themselves sanctuary cities, but there are cities that conduct themselves no different than those cities that have called themselves sanctuaries. And so how's the administration going to handle that, right? So if you have some cities that conduct themselves and are operating like a sanctuary city, but yet haven't gone through the formal process of self-terming, is there going to be a distinction? So those are kind of, legal, I guess, arguments that maybe we can consider. So I would just have you and Leslie and folks in your firm just take a look at that as the administration continues to talk about that. And obviously on new starts and on things having to do with the streetcar, the more we can put OCTA as the poster child on that, and maybe we're an interested supporter and advocate, on the minority end. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that helped out when we were there.
And I think the mayor did a really good job on that call, and with Darrell Johnson sort of helping to take a lead on the timeline. I thought that was very helpful, and Trevor really appreciated the information. So I thought that went well. And I know that I think Jorge Garcia and on your staff did an initial analysis of specific grants from the Department of Justice that I thought was helpful as well. So I think you have some of that information, but we can kind of pull all of it together because you do get Department of Homeland Security as well. So.
Right, and I know that's a fluid number, and that is always moving. So, how are you guys doing as far as wrapping up, Dan?
We're done.
Got it. Well, thank you both, Dan and Leslie. I didn't mean to rush you off, but I just want to make sure that you have an opportunity to hear from the committee and get some feedback, because that is, probably the most important thing. You heard some of my comments. I'm not sure if the council member has any further comments he'd like to make, but I think he's taking a lunch break here, so he's back.
Yeah, I have a question that would be enlightening to all of us on this issue of denial of detainer request by ICE. Have we, and I'm asking this question to our PD representative, have we received any requests by ICE along those lines? Would we ever?
Not that I'm aware of currently. Oh, sorry.
Because I know the city of Anaheim, they have a city jail, and I know they apparently had received some requests and denied them, so they're on the naughty list for that. And I don't think our city is on that list, but I don't know if we ever would be given the type of facility and operations that we run.
I'm not aware of any. However, I'm meeting with Chris Holland, the jail administrator, later this afternoon. I can get some definitive answer and
if you could research that. I mean, it could be that we will never be in a position to have to make that kind of denial, or maybe it just hasn't happened. But it would be good for us to know that.
Right, because I think they end up at county. It would be good to check that.
To verify that. Yeah.
I'll get that information too.
That'll be one of our get out of jail cards. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, council member. The only thing I was going to mention, Dan and Leslie and staff, is I know that we have a new senator, Senator Harris, and so we worked very closely with Senator Boxer, and obviously our long-standing relationship with Senator Feinstein, to the extent that maybe she gets some of our priorities, and we also make an introduction. We have that opportunity to maybe let her know who we are, and obviously a new congressman that we have who replaced outgoing Congresswoman Sanchez. Congresswoman Sanchez had been a valiant partner of ours and always supported all, if not most, of our legislative platform, and was a strong advocate. We want to do the same thing with Congressman Correa, and I think I had the opportunity when I was there just a few weeks ago, well, maybe it's a month ago now, to stop in and visit with Congressman Correa. So I did try to relay some of our priorities in a nutshell to him, but I think there has to be a more formal, visit, maybe when he's down here, to bring him in, talk to him about what we're doing, talk to him about some of our exposure, our priorities, and our real immediate goals. And I think that would be helpful for both those new members.
in that vein, I think both Leslie and I feel strongly, at least for your consideration, the committee's consideration, about coming out here, doing the trip, and touching the basis with folks, not just on the Hill, but also in the administration. Hopefully there'll be more people appointed by the time we do this trip. But I do think the timing is very important, and not to have you back here. Well, I think we do a fine job. I think the fact that you're back here and you're speaking on behalf of the city as elected officials, that's extremely important.
And it's rendered results. And I think to the council member's point, I think just on detainer and the question of how we conduct ourselves, I think the administration needs to understand nobody is violating the law here. I think if anything, again, we're codifying practices that we've had for the past 20 years, and we continue to be law-abiding and continue to be cooperative when it comes to those serious violent offenders. So I think that may need to be clarified to folks in the administration. But in any event, seeing no other comments or questions, thank you, Dan and Leslie. And we're going to bring on our state legislative team here. So to the extent that some of the issues may be of interest to our federal friends, because they are so intermingled, you're free to join, and actually it would be helpful as well.
And if not, when and if the occasion rises, I look forward to meeting you personally there in D.C. or out here. And I like the idea of maybe going out there and touching bases formally with some of these key offices. I do know Kamala Harris's Chief of Staff, Nathan Branken. He's a former fellow of mine in the state Senate, and and I think we both have met Senator Kamala Harris as well. And but it would be nice to meet with her and the Congress member as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Council Member, and we'll turn it over to Casey. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I thought I would focus similar. We submitted a report that encompassed last year's activity as well as that for the first quarter. But I thought it might be helpful if maybe I kind of focused on a couple of items that are topical and moving and going on in Sacramento right now. First, by just a brief overview, this is the first year of a 2-year session. With the November elections, we had kind of the last crop on the assembly of new members come in under new term limits. So at least on the lower house, we're going to have some stability. There won't be any natural occurring turnover due to term limits for the next 6 years. So as Mr. Solorio can attest, that should hopefully provide a little bit of stability and that members can plan a little long term. I think we're definitely going to see that on policy committee side, where you can have chairman and vice chairs in their positions more than just 18 months, get some familiarity and some credibility in the issues they're working on. A lot of the bills that have been introduced thus far this year, and it's been over 2,000 already, have been in response to activities going on at the federal level, which is a slight change than we've had in the last couple of years. Generally, activities went on in D.C. and Sacramento did their business, and there was interaction. But obviously now, a lot of the activities, whether it's the immigration, EPA standards, things like that, definitely the legislature is paying attention, reacting with legislative measures, with regulatory actions. So that's definitely something we're keeping a close eye on. In addition to kind of being at the beginning of the legislative session, the governor has introduced his January budget. Right now, where the legislature's at, they are doing oversight hearings to get more details, get more information from the Department of Finance, from the Legislative Analyst's Office on the governor's proposals. However, really, we're kind of waiting for the May revise to see what the final revenue numbers are. In the governor's January proposal, he more or less had revenues and expenditures flat from year over year. So the administration is kind of seeing the economy slowing its growth, and they're preparing for a potential downturn. Should that be the case, putting more money into the state's rainy day funds, limiting expenditures to existing programs, not proposing a lot of new expenditures on new items. As we move into May revise and the budget in June, we will see some other issues get pulled in, cap and trade, what's going to go on with that program, how those monies will be expended, the medical and adult use of marijuana, that framework is going to get pulled into the budget discussion, and then kind of the unknown of reacting to what goes on in D.C. and how that affects the state budget. In the January budget, there was additional money scheduled for healthcare due to the natural lessening of federal dollars for the Medi-Cal expansion, but obviously if there were some larger action on healthcare on the federal front, then the state would need to react to that accordingly. But as far as specific items go, and several of these have been touched on, so I'll try to be brief. Right now, there's the discussion going on immigration sanctuary cities. As was mentioned earlier, President Pro Tem De Leon has SB 54, which is a measure that bill just passed off the Senate floor on Monday, now heads over to the Assembly. That bill essentially limits state and local law enforcement's roles in immigration enforcement and ensures that people can access state services without worrying about their immigration status. The bill moved out of the Senate on a straight party line vote. There has still and there remains law enforcement opposition, though the Pro Tem has been working with law enforcement groups to try to address some of their concerns. Additionally, he did take amendments to remove the urgency clause that's largely done for political reasons on lowering a vote threshold, but the main effect of that would be even if the bill is passed by the legislature and signed into law, now we're looking at a January 1st effective date as opposed to going into law immediately. That bill, now that it's over in the Assembly, will likely face some more scrutiny. Some of the more moderate Democrats may have some issues locally supporting that bill. So obviously we'll continue monitoring that and the bills as they move through. I'm happy to work with the city to convey any concerns or issues to the delegation that may be there with that bill. On the immigration issue, another bill that was mentioned is Senate Bill 6 by Senator Hueso, and that bill does appropriate $12 million for setting up, providing legal services. It would allow the Department of Social Services to contract with nonprofits to provide legal services. Obviously, $12 million statewide is not a lot of money, so there will be emphasis placed on working with immigrants with children, immigrants who have parents that are citizens, veterans, those seeking asylum. So it does have priorities within it. That bill also does establish a framework within the fund that it establishes, so it can take private donations. So if there were outside groups other than the state that wanted to help fund those efforts, the state is setting that up as well. And then the last measure I'd mention on the immigration issue is one, Councilmember Sarmiento, that you mentioned. Mr. Gibson, Assemblymember Gibson, has a bill, AB 440. As it's written right now, it just calls on the Department of Finance to establish a stakeholder working group to determine what level of exposure to loss of funding that local governments and cities have due to the sanctuary city policies being discussed in D.C. Depending upon how that is carried out federally, depending upon what the exposure is locally, we could see some more kind of meat put into that vehicle as it moves down the line. But that's obviously something that the legislature is keenly aware of and is watching very closely. Another item which is happening right now, and I will apologize to Tony for stealing some of his thunder on this one right now, is the transportation infrastructure package that's being discussed. The governor and legislative leaders at the end of last week announced that they had reached level of agreements to be determined, but had reached agreement on an overall transportation funding package. This is something that the administration and legislature have been prioritizing for several years now. They've just never been on the same page. They've never been able to coalesce around one proposal. They did announce that proposal last week. It's a measure that would raise revenue through a number of different sources, through a gas tax, through diesel tax, through an imposition of a annual registration fee for zero emission vehicles. So from a number of different sources, it would raise a little over $52 billion over 10 years. The proposal as it's written anticipates splitting that money half and half between the states and the locals. On the local side, there's $15 billion for local streets and road repair. There's $7.5 billion, and this is over 10 years, so this won't all be 1 year, but so divide by 10. $7.5 billion for local public transportation. There's additional $2 billion for self-help counties like Orange County. $1 billion for projects that promote walking, bicycling, and then some other kind of miscellaneous items. On the state, obviously, there's a big focus on the state highway system. $15 billion would go towards the state highway system. There is $3 billion for trade corridors and another $2.5 billion on commuter corridors. So when we start thinking of things like grade separations like that, in as much as those do occur in or around major trade corridors near the highway system, obviously there'd be some funding available for that. The legislature held committee hearings on the package on Monday. They're anticipating holding floor votes in the Assembly and Senate on this package tomorrow. The governor and others have been going around the state this week. I believe there was a press conference in Sacramento this morning. Since the measure does increase taxes, it does require a 2/3 vote. And it will be close. There's still some Democrats, which is why the governor's going around the state. He's hitting targeted districts where he thinks that there may be some pushback from more moderate Democrats to try to shore up their votes. At this point, there hasn't been indication that any Republican members are willing to vote for it, but as these things work themselves out, we may still see one or two votes appear. So that'll be happening tomorrow. The legislature is trying to get this done before they start on their spring recess. So to be determined. Another item I'd like to touch on briefly relates to cannabis, both the medicinal framework and adult use through Proposition 64. I bring this up because yesterday the governor's office, for the first time, released their budget trailer bill language, which lays out the roadmap of how they are going to be approaching blending the two systems together. They're introducing that as budget trailer bill language, so obviously they want to move quickly on this. If it was done as part of the budget, we'd be looking at June 15th, so just kind of 8 weeks or so. The bill doesn't have to be done by then, but there will likely be pressure to get that done. Big picture is that the administration is promoting using Proposition 64, which was voter approved, as the framework, and then weaving the medicinal framework into that. There would still be a dual licensing commencing in January of 2018. Everything that we've seen so far, the administration's talking about so far, would be preserving local control, would allow local cities, essentially the city first. So if you don't, you will need to show proof of local license, local approval before the state's going to give you their approval. So they're definitely maintaining a local control component to it. The administration also is going to try to keep a firewall between the adult use licenses and business and the medicinal side. A lot of that is given the uncertainty on the new attorney general and how enforcement may go along on that side. So they're trying to keep a kind of a firewall and differences on those two sides. Obviously, stakeholders, local governments, industry will continue working on the budget trailer bill with the administration over the coming weeks. So anticipate that final legislative language will be in late May, early June, but at least the administration has kind of put their foot forward on where they stand. Additionally, there's 25 different bills related to cannabis on various aspects, from marketing, advertising, taxation. All of those will work through the normal legislative process over the coming months. The last thing I wanted to touch on as well is just as it's moving forward, it relates to affordable housing, relates to homelessness. You may recall in 16 as part of the budget package, the governor and the legislative leaders established the No Place Like Home program, which provides $2 billion in Proposition 63 bond proceeds for homelessness and mental health services. That program has yet to roll out, but they are HCD and the advisory group has set up a draft framework, and they're going to be starting the regulatory process here in the coming weeks. We anticipate that draft regulations for that program will be out likely within the month. Then the advisory group will continue to take public comment on those. At this point, HCD is anticipating summer, late spring, early summer for adoption of those regulations. The way the legislation was written, it will have to go through a court validation process before they can begin issuing that money. So at this point, the HCD is anticipating a NOFA will hit the street. They're calling it winter 2018, which they're interpreting as Q1 of 2018, but that'll largely depend upon how quickly the courts act on that. Within that, there's two pots of funding. There's $200 million for kind of over-the-counter formulaic money, and then the large portion is $1.8 billion. The funding for that is broken up by county size. The counties administer the funding. Orange County is within the large counties portion, which is 13. The 13 largest counties with LA has its own set aside. So there's approximately $685 million that will be available over the course of several rounds for the No Place Like Home funding. Would note, though, that there are some issues potentially with the guidelines and how much funding may be made available. So we'll continue to work with staff on those. And I think then I would just pass it over to Corey so she can talk about Park Bond.
Very briefly, if you could, Corey, because we're going to have to leave in a few minutes here. I know the councilman was supposed to leave an hour ago, and I'm up against the deadline as well, so if you can.
Sure. Just quickly, since it was brought up a couple times today, the Parks Bond. In 2016, there was a $3.5 billion Parks Bond measure, AB 2444. Due to time constraints, the governor and leadership agreed to postpone that to 2017. However, we were successful in the 2016 version of the bond through some clever definitions and language to include a $3.1 million earmark to the city of Santa Ana for the lower Santa Ana River. So that money was going through the California Coastal Commission and then one step further down to the Santa Ana River Conservancy, and then some further definitions sent 50% of that to Santa Ana and Anaheim because of how we were able to define those cities. Additionally, through a completely different section of the bond, so non-competing funds, we were also able to include about $8.5 million for the Discovery Cube Orange County. It was a $17 million pot, but $8.5 for Orange County, $8.5 for LA. So certainly funding that Santa Ana residents would benefit from. Joint use was also discussed slightly at the end of last year, but again, because of timing, that conversation got pushed to this year. So this year, we've already been working with the authors, leadership, your delegation to ensure that the $3.1 million is included in the bond. If there's an opportunity to increase that, we're absolutely going to do everything we can to get even more money to the city. And then we've also been talking to folks about joint use funds and putting that into the Parks Bond as an opportunity as well.
Thank you, and thank you for that, and thank you for being brief. I'll go ahead and bring it back to the council member. Council member, any brief comments?
No, I think I had sufficient comments to make earlier. I think I am good right now, but I did have one question. I forget what was one of the last things you were mentioning, Casey, but...
No Place Like Home?
Oh, yes. What's the status of the veterans bond for housing that was passed in June of 14?
Yeah, there has been legislation. I'd have to check. I think there was legislation last year to try to get more accessible for renting, and so it wasn't just home ownership. I know there were some issues.
Maybe your housing department can send us a separate email with a follow-up on where that is at, because we're actually right now working on some veterans housing projects that maybe could benefit, or if not, there will be more. So you could follow up, that would be great, because we definitely need those resources and have a lot of veterans, many of them homeless here in Santa Ana and Orange County. Thank you.
And so in the interest of time, I am going to just concur with everything that was said. Thank you for that report. And I know that Townsend has been with the city for many years. And didn't you guys just hit an anniversary here or something? Or, I know Christopher was mentioning something like that.
Yeah, I think that the city was one of Christopher's first clients, and he just celebrated. We'll be closing in on 20 years next year, so it's obviously the city is very near and dear to our firm and our mission, and hope to make it another 20.
Well, we appreciate it. We appreciate all the good work, and I know you guys are a very robust firm. You have folks down here, you have folks in Sacramento, so. You're the local team and the Sacramento team as well, but you guys are a very big firm and do a lot of good work. And I know I was on the Water District when you represented us there, and you represented us well. So with that, let me turn it over to Tony. Tony, you're going to give us a very, very brief.
Very brief. Yes.
Anything that has not been discussed already.
In regards to federal immigration, the league did send out a press release basically saying we're opposed to the president's executive order that he released. We did support the city's local control to be a sanctuary city. We also said, with all due respect, we don't want a mandate on what our local law enforcement should be focusing on. So I've made that press release available. Our new executive director did draft an article addressing what we're doing to address the shortage on affordable housing. So I did want to provide that to the committee. In regard to the transportation proposal that was agreed to, $5.2 billion every year. There is no sunset date on this. $1.5 billion would be coming directly to cities for the local streets and roads. I have a 3-page detailed analysis on the framework of that package. We met directly with the governor the day it was released. Our two main questions are, what are the direct allocations to cities, and are those revenues, those new revenues, going to be protected from future state takeaways, and are they going to be going to transportation? Those are the two issues that we're focusing on. The bill is SB 1, that contains the formula piece and the revenues and the reforms to Caltrans and other parts of government. ACA 12 is the constitutional amendment that contains the protections that, if passed, would go before the voters in June of 2018. So that is provided. We also we have a strong support position on it. We have our support letter as well as a sample support letter if the city wishes to join us on our support. Actually, just during this meeting, I was asked by headquarters if we can actually have leadership from the city make a call into Assemblywoman Sharon Quirk-Silva, because her vote is going to be critical on this transportation funding piece, which will be taking place in about 24 hours. With that, I just want to address one bill that we're opposed to, SB 649. It deals with small cell towers. It preempts your local land use authority on the time, place, and manner of the placement of these cell towers. In the interest of local control, we have an opposed position on it, and I've provided a coalition letter opposing the bill for this committee.
Great.
And with that, I'll conclude my presentation.
Thank you so much, Tony. Councilmember, any final thoughts?
Yes, that last bill that you mentioned, I oppose it. I'm sure our Parks Department opposes it. One of the things that would do, in addition to taking away a lot of our local control over the siting of these cell towers, including small cell towers, is it would greatly reduce how much money we can receive from the cell companies for siting them. Because we right now, I think, receive a pretty good sum per each siting, and we've done that to do park improvements. We have a city policy to keep those revenues local. This bill, if passed and signed, would shrink that a lot. So in addition from losing local control, we also lose local revenue. So if we can maybe as a committee agree to oppose that and send a letter, that would be fantastic.
No opposition. I'm in complete agreement with that. I also think if we can have staff look at the letter from the league, their support letter, and see if that language is something that we can agree with, I think it's helpful. And if there is a communication that we can make to the Assemblywoman, I think we both know Sharon well. I'll certainly be giving her a call also. I think that those were my closing comments. Any closing comments, Councilmember?
No, good meeting. Good start off the year, and look forward to good things ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for everybody's patience. For the council member, I know you were supposed to leave an hour ago, but these are important issues, and thank you to all the staff who put this together. And is April the 5th the next meeting date, or is that still fluid?
So today's meeting was April 5th. We will connect with the council member and see. Tentatively, it was going to be in July, but then hearing the comments from Councilmember Solorio, we'll determine what would be the next
You'll
best
let us
date,
know.
And we'll let you know.
Thank you.
You're
With that,
welcome.
we're adjourned.
Thank you.